It is always a pleasure to be with School Boards Association, so thank you for the opportunity to join you. Thank you, Tom, for your tremendous leadership of the organization, and Tim for your leadership. Thank you to so many of you who I've met at our quarterly meetings and at visits all across the state. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk with you. I'm going to talk only very briefly, so I want to make sure we have as much time as possible for the Q&A. A couple themes that I want to share. One is, I want to tell you that I am incredibly optimistic about where we are in this work. It is hard. There's no question that the work of implementing higher standards, raising the bar for students, the work of transforming how we evaluate teachers and principals, all of that is hard work, it is challenging work, but I'm incredibly optimistic because of the leadership in this room. The leadership that school boards across the state have shown around the work on the Common Core, the leadership that school boards have shown in committing resources to professional development to support their teachers and principals, the leadership that school boards are showing in grappling with the challenges of the current fiscal environment and prioritizing instruction and opportunities for students even as you navigate the challenging times. So I am very optimistic, and I am optimistic because of what I see in classrooms. I visited nearly 40 schools since the start of the school year in every corner of the state. And what I see in classrooms is teachers and students engaged in the work of the Common Core. I see Corliss Kaiser here from Fayetteville Manlius. In FM, you can clap for it, Corliss, that's good. When I went to visit FM, I met with teachers and principals and parents and school board members who together began the work on implementing the Common Core really when the standards were still in draft form in 2009, and have spent the last 4 years working collaboratively to develop curriculum materials that support their students, to create a culture around implementation of the Common Core where they're constantly asking, how can we make this work better for our students? And when I went into classrooms, I saw teachers having rich discussions with students about text, classrooms where students were doing problem solving in math, where students were being challenged to think critically. Think of the Amherst School District that I visited, where they have used the work on teacher evaluation and principal evaluation to support their work on the Common Core, to develop a common vocabulary across the district around what good teaching looks like, and are creating time for teachers to meet together, to plan together, and to discuss how they continuously improve their instruction. I was in Copenhagen, where I saw teachers leveraging technology to support student success with respect to the Common Core, using technology to differentiate instruction, to allow students who are able to move more quickly to do so, students who needed extra support to get that extra support, all with the coaching and support of teachers. I was in Port Chester not long ago, 2 weeks ago, I think. I was in Port Chester and saw classrooms with many students who are English language learners, who are doing the work of the Common Core, who are reading challenging texts, who are sitting together and discussing text based on evidence, who are working with their teachers to learn science and social studies and to use reading and science and social studies to support their learning across the curriculum. And even earlier this week, I was in Harlem in a classroom sitting with 2 students talking about similar themes between To Kill a Mockingbird and Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. And the students were talking about evidence from both of the texts and why the texts were similar. Those are the kinds of conversations I see all the time, and that is what makes me optimistic about the work that we are doing together on the Common Core. We also just had on Tuesday at the Board of Regents meeting a school finance symposium where we talked about creative ways that districts across the state are figuring out how to better deploy resources to focus on students. Pat Michel talked about ways in which districts in his region are figuring out how to do transportation in smarter ways to ensure that resources that were going to transportation can now go to instruction. Don Ogilvie talked about how districts in his region have collaborated around health care coverage through a health trust that is saving them millions of dollars in premium costs and allowing them to invest those resources in students. We heard about our virtual advanced placement initiative, which was funded through Race to the Top, that has districts all across this room working on shared advanced placement courses that wouldn't be possible except for sharing those courses through technology, through blended learning. So there's tremendous leadership in this room about how to figure out the best ways to use resources for the sake of students. I'm also encouraged. This week we announced nearly $80 million in grants directed to teacher leadership around the Common Core and improving instruction, leveraging our highly effective teachers to support their colleagues in support of good instructional practice. And if you haven't seen that announcement, I encourage you to take a look at it. Part of that announcement was about a new round of funding that will be available if districts in this room want to individually or collaboratively or together with their BOCES launch a teacher leadership initiative focused on the successful implementation of the Common Core. And finally, I'm encouraged by the work that I see happening all across the state around career and technical education. The Chancellor and I believe that career and technical education has to be a part of a vision of multiple pathways to graduation for our students. Also has to be a part of how we ensure that we are engaging students and giving them opportunities to succeed in the 21st century economy. When we, together with the governor, launched the P-TECH Replication Grant Program to replicate the P-TECH partnership in Brooklyn between the New York City Department of Education, the City University of New York, and IBM, where students graduate with a high school diploma and associate's degree and first in line for a job at IBM. When we launched that initiative, we expected a lot of applications, but we got more than we even expected, and now we have 16 places across the state where we're launching replications of P-TECH. Communities all across the state brought together business leaders, higher education leaders, and school district leaders to figure out how do we work together to give students new pathways to opportunity in the 21st century economy. And as many of you know, I have to leave here exactly at 10:45 to head to New York City, where the president will be visiting P-TECH and where we'll be talking about the opportunity that P-TECH represents, not just for New York, but for the country, as we look to a vision where career and technical education is central to our vision for education. So there's lots of reasons to be optimistic. It doesn't mean the work isn't hard, and it doesn't mean there don't need to be adjustments along the way. Even this week, the Board of Regents was talking about ways that we might use our next waiver from NCLB, our next waiver application, to address some of the challenges that we see in school districts around the state. They also, at the encouragement of our community of superintendents, I see Lorna Lewis here, who at the NYSSBA conference, we were talking about this idea that, yes, we can clap for Lorna. At the NYSSBA conference, we were talking about the challenge that our 8th graders who are in accelerated math and are taking Regents courses have to take both the Regents exam and the 8th grade math exam. And historically, the U.S. Department of Education has required us to give both. And I commented at the NYSSBA conference that Tennessee had been allowed flexibility in this area and that we might be able to persuade the U.S. DOE to give us similar flexibility to eliminate that double testing in 8th grade. And Lorna said, well, will you advocate for it? And I said, of course, that's what I'm saying. And she said, but will you advocate for it passionately? And I said to her, I always advocate passionately. And we did, and the US DOE has said that they are open to our submitting that waiver request, which the board approved this week. And so we look forward to making change in the 8th grade testing requirements. So let me stop there. Again, thank you for this opportunity to be with you, and I'm happy to take your questions and comments.
Hi, Mike Wynick from Nassau BOCES. Dr. King, thank you for joining us today. You, as well as others, have constantly stated how far this country is behind the rest of the world. If that is the case, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? Why don't we simply model our education system after Finland, which is allegedly tops? For example, in Finland, classes are small, under 20. In Finland, there are no formal grades and no high-stakes tests. In Finland, educators make education decisions not business people or politicians. In Finland, they prepare children how to learn, not how to take tests. I can go on, but I'm sure you get the point. The US is top-down, while in Finland, it is bottom-up. Isn't it a time to reassess the policies of Washington and Albany? Thank you.
So a few thoughts. One is, one of the challenges in the United States is that we are behind in some places and ahead in others. And so it's always hard to speak with nuance about the performance of a country or a state. We know that we have districts that are getting excellent outcomes for students and other districts that are struggling for a variety of reasons. But what we do know is that when you look at our international competitors, Finland is one, but one can also look at Singapore and Korea and Germany. We know that across our international competitors, one of the things that almost all of them have is a common set of national standards that are consistent across the country. In those standards in mathematics, they focus on ensuring that students achieve deep conceptual understanding of math before they move between grade levels. So one of the reasons that we've adopted the Common Core, along with 45 other states, is because the Common Core standards reflect what we know about math education internationally, what we know about those countries that are outperforming us in mathematics. Another thing we know about our international competitors is that they tend to focus intensely on teacher preparation. And we are doing the same. The Board of Regents committed to raise the bar for teacher certification and to ask our teacher prep institutions to do more to focus on the clinical preparation of teachers and their content knowledge, which is very much a part of the Finland story. They're incredibly selective about who can attend teacher preparation programs and set a very high bar for their graduates. With respect to assessment practices vary across our international competitors. Some, like Finland, tend to emphasize assessments in high school to determine students' path. Others emphasize assessments throughout their instructional program. But what we're committed to doing is making sure that we have the best possible education system in New York State. We believe the Common Core is part of the path to get there.
Good morning, Commissioner, and thank you again. I heard you had a rough I heard you had a rough time the other day in Poughkeepsie. And I'm sorry for that, but I also have to say, welcome to our world. As elected officials, we try to implement new programs while raising taxes. And like Will Rogers, all I know is what I read in the paper. And apparently, you canceled the series and then have reestablished it, but because the meetings were taken over by special interests. And the newspapers and the other media reports haven't explained who those special interests are. But in my opinion, if parents, teachers, school board members, and the taxpayers that pay for education aren't interested parties, who's left to be special?
So a few thoughts on Poughkeepsie. What folks in this room know is that I spend a tremendous amount of time visiting schools and districts around the state. Probably visited somewhere towards 140 schools and districts since September of last school year. I've met with many of you in your schools, in your districts. I've met with you in regional school board association meetings. When I was just in the North Country, I was in a region of the state where a commissioner hadn't been there in 30 years. So I'm committed to listening and to creating opportunities to engage with folks, and I'm comfortable with tough questions and difficult exchanges. What I don't think is constructive is when meetings devolve into heckling and screaming. One of the things that happened in Poughkeepsie is a parent tried to ask if people could just quiet down enough so that he could hear the discussion, and the crowd turned on him and screamed at him. People yelled epithets as part of their heckling. It was not a conversation that was going to be productive. Now look, people have said to me democracy is messy. I believe that. I was a high school history and civics teacher. Democracy is messy, but it shouldn't be chaos, and it shouldn't be it shouldn't be hostile. And tough conversations. Thanks. So we suspended the meetings that we had structured in the way that the Poughkeepsie meeting was structured, so that we could have a better structure. We've done that. We'll have 16 similar forums around the state with a different format, so that the dialogue can be constructive and there can be an opportunity to listen. And we will certainly take feedback. I just was at a session last night that was 3.5 hours in Albany. It's an opportunity for people to express their concerns. And we will listen to those concerns and we will make adjustments. But I want to be very clear, as the Chancellor was, we are committed to the work on the Common Core. We are committed to the work on teacher and principal evaluation. We are committed to the agreements that we made with the governor and the legislature and the statewide teachers union on the evaluation system. We're committed to the agreements that we all made collectively as a state in the Race to the Top application. And most importantly, we are committed to ensuring that every student graduates prepared for college and career success. And so that work needs to move forward. There will undoubtedly be adjustments along the way, but our commitment to those principles shall not waver.
Good morning. I'm a retired math teacher. I taught math grades 8 through 12. And in working on the core curriculum before I retired, and you mentioned earlier, in math, problem solving and critical thinking is what we want our students to do. But when we started the core curriculum, the method for problem solving and critical thinking was removed from the curriculum. How does that make it better for our students? And I'd also like to see more, especially elementary teachers, involved in the changes that are made. I witnessed some modules being taught, and the material there was way too much for them to present in 1 hour. I'm not sure how they were all prepared, but I think some change has to be made there. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. It's an important opportunity to add some clarity. So one thing that's important, and I think many in the room know this, Common Core standards are not a curriculum. Curriculum decisions rest with all of you. Curriculum decisions are local decisions. We committed at the outset of the implementation of the Common Core to build curriculum materials that would be a resource for districts. And the modules are a resource. They are not a mandate. They are not a requirement. They are most certainly not a script. They are a resource for districts to use as they see fit as part of their local curriculum decisions. One of the things that's critically important is that that resource has to be adapted to meet the needs of the students in front of the teacher at the time. And so it's important that teachers have time and the professional development and support to adapt the materials to meet their students' needs. For example, the math modules have far more problems, math exercises, math problems, than a teacher could accomplish. And so there have to be judgments about which exercises to use, which not to use, which makes sense. There needs to be a bridge built for students. Some students had very strong Common Core preparation last year. Others did not. And so there has to be a bridge built for those students who are struggling. And those decisions have to be made locally. But what I've seen in classrooms across the state over the course of the year is people using the modules in ways that do get students engaged in problem solving, that do have students constructing mathematical models. We've got on Engage New York videos of some classrooms around the state doing the math work. We have a classroom in Watervliet. We just added a video of a class in Watervliet with students doing hands-on math activities with the modules. But the use of the modules is up to you. It's up to local decision making.
Hi, thank you for coming today. I'm Judy Murphy, and I represent the Cortland and Large City School District Board of Education. On Tuesday night, we had a parent advocate group attend our meeting, and they have created a group called CARES, Caring Advocates for a Responsible Education System. In less than 2 weeks, they have 400 followers and 50 people attended the meeting. 3 points they would like me as a board representative and my other board members to bring to you include that they feel that the Engage New York modules were hasty and often are developmentally inappropriate for the students at the particular grade levels for which they are assigned, that there has been a very rapid increase in high-stakes testing, and that they request an immediate solution before their children who get one chance at each grade feel further traumatized. Thank you.
So a couple points on that. Thank you for the question. The modules, again, are a local decision. And whether they make sense for a given community, that's a local decision. I will say the developmentally inappropriate suggestion troubles me, and I'll tell you why. The K through 2 reading materials that we adopted have a 30-year track record of success across the country. They were developed, the core knowledge materials, which E.D. Hirsch led the development of. The books, you've probably seen them in bookstores for decades now. What every first grader should know, what every second grader should know. That's the same person behind the development of the core knowledge materials. The core knowledge materials have been piloted in schools across the country literally for decades. The materials, the current materials, the materials that we adopted for New York actually were used in a controlled experiment comparing the performance of students who participated in those materials and students who did not. And the students who participated in the core knowledge materials dramatically outperformed the other students. So there's a long research history behind those materials. One of the things they emphasize, which the early childhood educators in the room will know, is that students in the early grades can comprehend far more orally than they can by reading. And so one of the powerful insights of the Common Core standards is that in the early grades, read-alouds and the opportunity to hear rich language and build your vocabulary is critical to students' long-term success. It's a famous study by Hart and Risley that showed that students in poverty versus affluent students arrived at school with a 30 million word gap. They'd heard 30 million fewer words. And so the core knowledge materials emphasize creating environments where students are hearing lots of rich language to build their vocabulary, and where students are building background knowledge, things like history and science, so that they have that background knowledge to bring with them into the text that they read, as well as developing the phonological knowledge and phonemic awareness that we know are essential for students' ability to become good readers. So there's a strong research history behind the reading materials, but they're not mandated. And if a district decides that they don't want to use the core knowledge materials, that's a decision that they can make.
Good morning, Commissioner King. Randall Johnson, the City of Poughkeepsie School District. And before I get into my question, I want to set the record straight that the forum that was held in the Hudson Valley was not held in Poughkeepsie. It was held in Spackenkill. So from this point on, if we can move forward and use Spackenkill, New York, I really would appreciate it because we're getting a lot of feedback from some of my colleagues here today.
That's a very fair point, very fair point.
Okay, thank you. My question, the curriculum of inclusion was written for children by the SED department, okay, and I read it, and I think it's the Task Force for Minorities and Equity and Excellence. As the commissioner, my question to you is, how is the inclusion of Native Americans, Hispanic, Latinos, and African Americans reflected across the Common Core curriculum content standards? Because we don't see it.
So I really appreciate the question, and something we're very committed to. And if you look at the text list for all of the materials that we will develop in New York State, there's very strong representation of a diversity of authors and a diversity of experiences. Now, it's important to say that is not the same as the Common Core standards. the standards don't actually have required text other than, I think, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, maybe one other. So there is an appendix to the Common Core standards, which was generated by the authors of the standards, that has a text list, but that is not a required part of the standards. We are building a set of materials around a set of texts where we have paid close attention to diverse authors and diverse experiences, but those are optional, and districts will have to decide whether or not to use them. And these are hard questions. Last night at the forum in Albany, one of the parents complained that the middle school, one of our middle school texts, or middle school text that was being used in her child's school, addressed the subject of segregation and some of the brutality of the segregation era. Now, in her view, that was too much for her middle school student, and it was too graphic for her middle school student. That's a fair point. These are decisions that have to be made locally, and it's a struggle to make those decisions. And one thing we knew when we committed to curriculum work was that as soon as we put out a text list, people would say, why is this one on and why is this one off, and is this the right book at the right age, and so forth. But those are local decisions, and each district, I think it's important for board members to engage with their district leadership team and to understand how the district is approaching the Common Core and approaching this issue of emphasizing the diversity that reflects America. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioner. Neil O'Brien, Superintendent, Port Byron Schools. Everybody, I think, is knowledgeable of your remarkable journey from Canarsie, Brooklyn. I know today you're going back to Brooklyn, probably bring a smile to your face. Mine is a less remarkable story. I grew up in Yonkers, New York, and I went to public school. And from my house, it was a 5-minute walk to Eastchester and a 10-minute walk to Scarsdale Public Schools. And I was blessed with a great mother who helped navigate me through Yonkers Public Schools. If you're not aware of it, it was a time of tremendous troubles, the first financial meltdown in Yonkers, and a very big struggle. And so when I think of the reform movement, I think of the Common Core, I keep looking back to my childhood saying, you know, something's got to change in how we do education. There shouldn't be a 5-minute walk or 10-minute walk to quality education, and shouldn't have to have a mom navigate. I also am a child of the 70s, and I remember my favorite TV show was Welcome Back, Kotter. You smiled, so I know you're 10 years younger than me. You must have seen the repeats.
Reruns.
Okay. And I laughed and enjoyed the sweat hogs more than anybody else, but I recognized when I went to school, there were two tracks, one of high expectations and one of low expectations. And so in many ways, I'm very excited about the reform movement, but I am a school superintendent. I see high levels of agitation. And you talk about adjustments. How do we not lose the momentum? What are the adjustments you're thinking about? Where are you going with adjustments so when I have those parents, if I was in Cortland, I don't lose them? Because if they congeal with those who are atavistic, who want to go back, we'll lose the reform movement. So it's a magic moment. Where do we go from here to support forward?
Thanks. Let me say first, some of the adjustments that we need to make will require working with the legislature and the governor. One adjustment, fundamentally to your question, is around resources. And the regents have a long history of advocating for greater equity in school finance. And I think it's critically important as we move into the next budget conversation that the issue of equity in school finance is front and center, and that we as a state think about how we ensure that the resources are in place in every community to actually be positioned to successfully raise standards. Another part of that challenge is around early childhood. And the regents last year recommended to the governor and legislature increasing the investment in early childhood, and pre-K in particular, by $75 million. The governor and legislature put in $25. We have a universal pre-K in the program in this state that is not universal. It should be. And we should make sure that all of our students have access, particularly in our highest needs communities, to high quality, full day pre-K. And that will ensure, that will better ensure that students arrive at kindergarten prepared to succeed with respect to the Common Core. So some of the adjustments will require the cooperation of the legislature and the governor. There are some adjustments that we can make at SED. We talked at the board meeting this week, I mentioned the change around algebra. We talked at the board meeting this week about our next round of the ESCA waiver application and the possibility of working with the US DOE on the idea of native language arts assessments. You know, we assess our English language learners after they've been here a year in English. We translate our exams in math, but we assess them in English for their literacy skills. We believe that we can, working with other states and the U.S. Department of Education, develop a plan that would allow us to use native language arts assessments for those first years of transition. So assess students in their native language so that they can continue to build their literacy skills as they transition over to English. We also talked about assessments for students with disabilities. And it's a dilemma not just for New York, but for the country. The US DOE allows 1% of students to take the alternate assessment. But we all struggle with the question, is 1% the right number? And is there another set of students above that 1% who need to have assessments that maybe are a different instructional level than their chronological age? And that's a conversation that will be a complicated conversation with the U.S. Department of Education. They are constrained by the language of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act as well as IDEA, but we are committed to working with them to see if we can find a way so that an additional segment of the student population is able to take assessments that make more sense for them. And we will all have to grapple together with what the right percentage is for that, so that we ensure that we never set our expectations too low or deny our students with disabilities access to a rich curriculum. We also talked on Monday about a grant initiative that would help districts to review their locally selected assessments. You know, one of the things that is complicated about this current debate about the role of testing is that we actually haven't added state tests in essentially a decade. We test in English language arts and mathematics in grades 3 through 8, science in 4 and 8, and then the high school 5 Regents exams, 3 of which are federally required. Those are the state assessments. But there are other assessments that are given, some related to APPR, some related to informing instruction. Those are important, but we know that there may be an opportunity for districts to revise their strategies, to replace some assessments that are only multiple choice with assessments that require students to write more, to demonstrate problem-solving skills. Opportunities for districts to not use pretests if they want to use prior academic history to set targets for a particular grade or subject, or opportunities to use school-wide measures instead of additional assessments. And we know districts are already putting in material changes to their APPR plans, and we're working with districts on that. And we talked on Monday about a grant program that would support districts in reviewing their local assessments and asking, are these the right ones? Are they supporting instruction the right way? And then how do we work with our teachers to ensure that the culture we create around assessment isn't one that is stressful or a distraction, but actually one where assessments are truly embedded in instruction and support good outcomes for students. And so we'll move forward with that grant project. So those are the kinds of adjustments that we will continue to look to make and to identify opportunities to ensure that we are testing just as much as we need to inform good decision making at the classroom, school, district, and state level.
Thank you, Commissioner King, for coming today. My name's Tom Ledbetter. I'm with the Newark Central School District down in the Finger Lakes. You mentioned several times that districts have a choice as far as what modules they adopt and the curriculum they adopt, but all of our testing is based on Common Core standards, so it behooves us to push things in our district that align with those tests. To do that, and a lot of the Common Core has a lot of technology and the things that we're talking about in the near future of testing online and things have a lot to do with professional development of our staff. We have long since in our district far exceeded the amount of money we got for Race to the Top for professional development. And now we haven't even begun to put a dent in the professional development that our teachers and our administrators need. So I'm asking you, if we're going to be graded and our teachers are going to be graded on their success based on take tests, What are we going to do if we can't afford the professional development? Is the state going to come in? Are you considering the possibility of putting in some type of extra funds just for professional development, not reallocating existing funds, but extra funds for professional development for districts that are struggling?
I very much appreciate the question. I think one of the most important investments we can make is in professional development. It is worth saying that since 2010, we've spent several $billion as a state in federal and state dollars on professional development. Professional development is a dedicated share, is supposed to be a dedicated share of Title I, of IDA funds, of Title II. So just looking at federal and state dollars, we put more than half of the Race to the Top dollars towards professional development activities. So there's a lot of money that's been invested in professional development and in instructional materials through textbook aid. So one of the challenges is to ask, how are those resources currently allocated? Are the professional development activities the highest leverage activities? Are they one-shot workshops, or are they embedded opportunities for teachers to get ongoing support around implementing the Common Core standards? So one thing we all have to do, and we have to do this at the department as well with the dollars that we invest in professional development activities, is evaluate the effectiveness of those dollars. That said, part of this school finance symposium that we had on Tuesday was to think about what are the right strategic investments to make over the next 4 or 5 years. You know, we spend $57 or so billion a year in our schools. So, you know, in a 5-year period, we'll spend over $250 billion. And one of the questions that Region Talent on our board has posed is, so what's the smartest way to make that investment? What's our investment strategy for that $250 billion plus? And I would argue professional development does need to be central to that investment strategy. So does technology, not for the purposes of assessment, but for the purposes of instruction. And the board, we talked with the board on Monday about postponing for at least a year our implementation of the PARCC assessments, because we know we need more time as a state to build the technology capacity to deliver online assessments across the state. That said, we all know this from watching kids with iPads. It is inconceivable that 10 years from now, assessments will still be given on paper and pencil, and it's inconceivable that 10 years from now, technology won't play a larger role in students' day-to-day instruction. So technology has to be, again, one of those strategic investments we make. So we will certainly, in our conversations with the governor and the legislature over the next few months, focus on this issue of how do we invest in professional development, how do we invest in technology, how do we address our school finance equity challenges, and sometimes those will be in competition with each other, but we will try to navigate that, because I think you're exactly right. The success of any initiative in schools really rests on the professional development of the educators and their preparation to deliver on the change. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.